Hey there folks, Tim Slade here from the eLearning Designers Academy and community. In this how-to workshop, I'm going to be sharing with you some of my most practical and hopefully inspirational advice on how to grow your e-learning and instructional design career. So stick around. You know, if there's one question I get asked, at least recently, more frequently than any other, it's some version of how can I be successful in e-learning and instructional design? How can I make my way into e-learning and instructional design? And gosh, you know, if I had a single one sentence answer to that question, I would be sending it out every day of the week. The truth is, I have a lot of advice and I have a lot of thoughts on this, but it's not something that I can easily put into a couple of, short paragraphs. And so I decided to dedicate this how-to workshop on the topic of growing your e-learning and instructional design career that will hopefully provide you with my thoughts, my take on this very common question. Now, before we jump into it, if you happen to be watching this on YouTube, make sure to click that like, subscribe, and that bell button so that you'll get alerted the next time I publish a video just like this one. And of course, make sure to join us inside the eLearning Designers community. It's completely free, and it's a great place to start connecting, networking, and learning with others who are also working to grow their e-learning and instructional design careers. All right, so I want to start today's session by giving you a little history lesson, a little bit of my own story. You know, when I was a child, I dreamed of being a lot of different things. When I grew up, I dreamed of being an astronaut, and I dreamed at one point, for whatever reason, I thought, I'm going to be a lawyer, and then I'm going to be a judge. And then for a long time, I really wanted to be an architect. I remember I would make my mom go buy me all of these pads of graph paper. I still use graph paper today for all my notes. And I would draw out and sketch all of these ideas I had for houses and buildings and whatnot. And then eventually, as I got a little older and I got into middle school and high school, I was a huge theater and drama geek. And actually, when I started in college, my major was actually in theater because I thought I was going to be a theater teacher. And then I realized that wasn't going to make me any money. But I dreamed of being a lot of different things when I was a kid. I will tell you, the one thing that wasn't on that list was being an e-learning designer or an instructional designer. If I would have said to my mom when I was, I don't know how old I was here. Let's say I was, 3 or 4, I don't know. If I would have said to my mom, hey, I want to be an e-learning designer, she would have carted me off to a counselor or something. Who wouldn't cart their kid off to a counselor if they said something like that at that age, right? I dreamed of being a lot of things, but I never dreamed of being an e-learning designer, instructional designer. And so, after I graduated high school, like most people at that age, I was 18, 19 years old, I ended up, getting a retail job while I was in college. And I was working in the men's department of Dillard's department stores in the small town that I grew up in Prescott, Arizona. And through a weird series of events, I could do a whole nother session on this story. Through a weird series of events, I ended up falling into or landing a job in the loss prevention department at this store at Dillard's I was working at. And that's how I got into retail loss prevention. And for those of you who are not familiar with loss prevention, my job was to sit in a camera room in the far corner of the store and watch cameras all day and catch shoplifters. And I loved it. It was so much fun. And I was really good at catching shoplifters too. And I did that for several years up until my early 20s. And I always tell people, loss prevention is like one step up from being a mall cop. Funny thing is that for a period of time, I actually was a mall cop, like a literal mall cop, like you see here on the screen here, where I had to wear a suit just like that and walk around the mall. It was, before the era of the Segway, so we actually walked around the wall, so it was kind of, the real deal at that time. And I hopped around several different retailers working in loss prevention, catching shoplifters, and I was good at it, and I loved it. And I eventually decided, I think this is going to be my career path. And so I changed my major. I was going to go into theater, and then I was going to go into nursing because my dad was a nurse. And then ultimately it became criminal justice because I thought this is going to be my career path because it's what I fell into, and I was good at it. And when I was in my early 20s, I was working for Kohl's department stores. And for those of you outside the US, that's another major clothing retailer here. I was working at Kohl's department stores, and my boss came to me one day and he said, "Hey, you know what? You're really great at catching shoplifters," because I was. And he said, "You should be teaching others how to catch shoplifters." And I thought, yeah, that would be so much fun. And there just so happened to be a position for a training coordinator opened on the corporate loss prevention training team at the corporate offices for Kohl's department stores, which is in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, just outside of Milwaukee. And I was living, and I still live in Phoenix, Arizona's home, and I applied for this job. I was 22 or 23 at the time. I applied. They interviewed me. They flew me out there to interview. And for reasons that still make no sense to me today, I got the job. And of course, my time, at the time I thought it was because I catch shoplifters. I'm an expert at this. So of course they would pick me to be, now a trainer at that thing, right? So I took this job and I thought it was going to advance my loss prevention career. And I, packed up my stuff and moved across the country to Wisconsin thinking, yeah, now I'm going to be the corporate loss prevention guy. And that's kind of, the rest is history, right? Like I took that job, and I'll come back to that story here in a moment. But since then, I've had the opportunity to speak at conferences, and I eventually wrote a book on eLearning Instructional Design, and I've worked with all sorts of different clients, and I've managed teams of instructional designers and created courses with lynda.com and LinkedIn Learning. And, over the course of the 15 years I've been working in eLearning and instructional design, it's easy for me to look back and go, gosh, I've done so much cool stuff in my career. But the reason I share that with you is not to brag about all that I've done in the 15 years I've been in this industry, but to make the point that, when I first started, when I was first getting into this industry, the truth is I had no clue what I was doing. I was clueless about what it meant to be an e-learning designer or an instructional designer. And it's so interesting nowadays interacting with people who are working to make the transition into e-learning instructional design, or they're leaving teaching, or they're trying to grow their career, because there's so many resources out there nowadays to help you do that didn't exist 15 years ago when I was in those, in that position. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, because although there's so many resources out there to help you, what comes with that is also a lot of noise. There's so much noise out there begging for your attention, telling you what you should and should not be doing, and what you should and should not be focusing on, and how you should and should not be in this industry, or what skills you should and should not focus on, or how you should interact and network with people on LinkedIn, and what courses you should take or what courses you shouldn't take. There's so much noise out there about how to be successful in this industry, how to transition into it. And it presents a challenge of trying to figure out how to navigate all that noise. And I'm a contributor to some of that noise. I've created a lot of that noise over the 15 years I've been working in this industry. I'm creating some of that noise right now that you're listening to. The challenge is how do you tune into the noise that's actually going to help you, and tune out to the stuff that, isn't going to help you or isn't right for you. It's hard to figure the signal or find the signal in all that noise, right? And so what I want to do today during today's how-to workshop is a couple things. First, I want to help you learn how to cut through the noise, right? How do you find the signal in all of that noise that's out there so that you can focus on the things that are really going to help you? I also want to help you understand how to get yourself in the right mindset, not just for whatever your current goals are, but like the right mindset for your career. Because you have to be thinking about not just what your next step is, but what your step after that is. And I'll talk more about that later. And then I also want to talk about how to prioritize yourself in your career. So often we defer to others on the journey of our career and where our career is going to take us. And really, it's completely up to us to do whatever we want with our career. And part of that means learning how to prioritize ourselves in our own career choices that we make. Okay? So let's go back to the story of, my first e-learning job. So, back when I was 22, 23, I got this job at Kohl's department stores. I was a training coordinator within the loss prevention department. And I thought, this is going to be my ascendance into the loss prevention industry. Like, it was my first salary job. And I thought, great, I'm going to be the corporate loss prevention guy now with a career trajectory, and who is more, what is better than to be the person who not only used to catch shoplifters, but now I teach people how to catch shoplifters. Like, this is great for my career. And so I got into this role thinking this is going to be great and easy. And my first job, my first project as this training coordinator was to create a series of 5 e-learning courses on the 5-step process for catching shoplifters. And I had never created any sort of training before. I didn't know what instructional design was. I didn't know what e-learning was. I didn't know the difference between a stakeholder and a subject matter expert. I didn't know what a storyboard was or how to write one. I never used the e-learning authoring tool. I never managed really a project at all at that point. And now I'm managing this large-scale project that has a budget, and I had to hire actors because we were filming scenarios, and I had to work with all these different people and write storyboards to develop these courses that was going to be seen by thousands of people. And it was overwhelming. And there's a screenshot of one of the screens from the finished course. I mean, it was awful stock photography and horrible bullet points, and it was awful. And part of this project, like I mentioned a moment ago, we hired all these actors because we filmed all these scenarios, and this was a picture from that film shoot that day. You can see me there on the far right of the image, and I was clueless. I was way out of my depth on this project, and I did what anyone would do in that moment. Well, maybe not anybody, but what I did, because I couldn't just pack up and go home to Arizona. I'm on the other side of the country, and I'm in my early 20s, right? And so I did what a lot of people did. I faked it. I F.I.T.F.O'd it, and I have this acronym I use, F.I.T.F.O. I figured it the fuck out. I figured it the fuck out to get that project done, and I faked it. And that's worked for me. That worked for me at the time. The problem is, and it may have worked for you. You may have F.I.T.F.O'd things in your life before. The problem is that you can only F.I.T.F.O it for so long before you don't know whether or not you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. And what I'm hoping to do today is provide you some guidance or advice so that you don't have to F.I.T.F.O your own career decisions, your own career path, because I had to figure it all out on my own. And it's kind of what I've done. I've dedicated my career over the last 15 years is to help give people and teach people all the things that I had to figure out or I had to F.I.T.F.O on my own. You know what I mean? So I did this project 15 years ago. I created those 5 courses on catching shoplifters. And, at the time, like I said, I took that job because I thought it was going to advance my loss prevention career. I had just gotten my degree in criminal justice, and I was maybe like a year and a half into the job. And one of the things that I noticed as I looked around at my peers and other people in the department that I worked with is that people were no longer recognized me as the loss prevention guy. I was now the instructional designer guy. I was the trainer guy who just so happened to be creating content and training experiences on catching shoplifters. And this really, it hit my confidence, and I won't lie, it hit my ego really hard, because I wanted to be known as the loss prevention guy, but now I was known as the training guy. And what made those emotions even more difficult to process was not only was I known now as the e-learning training guy, I really liked e-learning and training. Like that project and the projects that followed after that, it uncovered within me talents and passions that I didn't even know were there. I realized that I loved e-learning, and I loved visual design, and I loved creating these experiences using all these cool different tools I'd never had access before. And what it ultimately resulted in is what I call a career identity crisis. I think everybody goes through a career identity crisis at some point, or maybe multiple points in their career, but it's when you're going down a particular path that you've invested a lot of time and money and effort in, right? Money in terms of school debt and going to college for these things. And then all of a sudden life and the universe throws a wrench in things, and all of a sudden out of left field, you're being presented with this opportunity that you would have never dreamed about for yourself, right? And it creates this fork in the road. And so I decided at the time, you know what, I really love e-learning and instructional design, and I'm going to pursue that. That's what I've been doing ever since. But what happened to me in that experience is that my career identity crisis ultimately led to my imposter syndrome. And, if you're not familiar, I feel like everyone's familiar with imposter syndrome nowadays because we talk about it so much. But if you're not familiar with imposter syndrome, it's this like existential dread that the people around you, your peers, your boss, are going to discover you for the fraud that you really are. You know what I mean? Like, I remember I used to have this dread sitting in my cube at work on the 5th floor of that office we worked at Kohl's. And I remember dreading that my boss was going to come around to my cube one day and go, why the hell did we hire you? Go back to the stores and catch shoplifters. You're not an instructional designer, right? I used to think that for a long time. And I remember several times asking her to tell me, like, why did you hire me? Because I didn't understand it, right? That was my imposter syndrome. And I've since learned, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, that everybody in our industry, at least most people in our industry, experience imposter syndrome as they're, growing in their careers. And then it wasn't until, a year, 2 years into the job, I was given the opportunity to attend a conference, an eLearning conference, a learning solutions conference in Orlando, Florida. This was probably in 2011, maybe. I attended this conference. I decided I wanted to do eLearning Instructional Design, and so I convinced my boss to send me to this conference, and so I can, learn more about eLearning Instructional Design, because I knew nothing. I was making it up as I was going along. And, if you've never been to a conference before, in your mind, these conferences are attended by all of these really, experienced people. And you go into it assuming you're going to be interacting with people and others who, worked really hard to become e-learning designers and instructional designers. And I got there and I started interacting with a bunch of different attendees and participants, and I was networking and learning. And one of the things that struck me really profoundly was that their stories were more similar to mine than what I ever could have imagined. More people, or everyone else there, for the most part, had stories like mine where they were good at something, catching shoplifters, they were good nurses or RNs or whatever. They were good at something, and someone came along and said, hey, you should be training others how to do it. And they kind of fell into the industry. And then they were at this conference trying to learn all the same things I was trying to learn. And it was that moment when I realized that most people fall into our industry by accident. And the truth is, I wasn't a black sheep, or I wasn't the exception to the rule. I was part of the majority. And in fact, and this is still true today, those people who, have degrees and all this stuff and went to college for it, those are far and few in between. Most people fell into this industry by accident. And that, it didn't help me get over my imposter syndrome, because I don't think you'll ever get over your imposter syndrome. I'll talk more about that in a moment, but it helped me cope with it better. It helped put it into perspective. I'll say that. Now, why do I share all that with you? I share that because, there were 3 really big lessons that I've learned from that experience. Has really changed my perspective on my career. And I think if you adopt these or think about them, it can really change your perspective as well. First thing I learned is that, you have to get outside your comfort zone if you really want to grow. You have to get comfortable with being outside your comfort zone. And we all know what it's like to be outside your comfort zone. A great example of it is, anytime you start a new job, it's like the first week or first couple weeks, first couple months, eventually you hit this moment where you have this freak out moment. I call it the first week freakouts. And it's this moment when you realize, oh my God, you don't know what you don't know. And you're like, what? God, I made such a mistake, and I want to go back to my old job because I was comfortable there and I knew everything there, as awful as that old job might have been, right? You want to run back, and retreat back to, the known quantity of whatever it is you were doing, right? And the truth is that you can't do that, because when you stay in your comfort zone, you atrophy. You're not challenged. You lose. You're not as passionate as maybe you would be, or you're just comfortable. And so the magic happens when you get outside your comfort zone. And not only do you have to get comfortable with being outside your comfort zone, but I've learned that you almost have to force yourself to get outside your comfort zone so that you can continue to grow. And yeah, that does oftentimes result in imposter syndrome, and you freak out. But you have to remember, it's all temporary and it'll pass the more you get comfortable with it. And I'll talk more about that too. Speaking of imposter syndrome, the second thing that I learned is that you can't let your imposter syndrome hold you back. I think We oftentimes perceive imposter syndrome as being a sign of insecurity, and thus we stigmatize what it means to say, yeah, I suffer from imposter syndrome. I suffer from imposter syndrome. All the time I have imposter syndrome, even to this day. But what I've learned about imposter syndrome, or the way at least I've changed my perspective on it, is that imposter syndrome is less a sign of insecurity or a lack of self-confidence. It's not a lack of self-confidence. It's a sign of self-awareness. Your imposter syndrome is self-awareness and acknowledgement of the fact that you don't know everything. And I think that's actually a good thing. When you can articulate what you are good at and what you're not good at, what you know, what you don't know, it allows you to be that much more discerning about how you go about your professional development, or what jobs or projects you take on, or whatever the case might be. It's those people who lack self-awareness of their strengths and weaknesses. Those people, Have you ever worked with somebody who thinks they're amazing at something when everyone's like, that person is not amazing at that, right? It's because they lack self-awareness. And so imposter syndrome is really just awareness and acknowledgement that you don't know everything. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And it's important to remember that your imposter syndrome, it would be my belief, and at least my experience, you don't ever get rid of your imposter syndrome. It will always be there. And it's just, like I said, acknowledgement that you don't know everything. And when you don't know everything, or when you know don't know everything, it can be empowering to help you, help direct you or point you in the right direction for what you should be doing. All right. The other thing that I learned, the third thing I learned from my, trial by fire, being thrown in the deep end of the pool in this industry, is that your career isn't linear. One of the things that we're taught from a young age, at least my generation, especially, if you're somebody who lives here in the United States, this is very true for us, is that we're taught, we grow up going through school being told that our ultimate goal is to graduate high school, go to college, figure out what we're going to do for the rest of our lives at a young age, get a degree in that thing, go find a corporate cushiony, high-paying job, stay there forever, and then retire, with a pension in Boca Raton, Florida, or Sun City, Arizona, right? And when we think along those lines, this is what we think our career is supposed to look like. We start somewhere and it's linear and it just goes up from there. Truth is, that doesn't exist anymore. That is not a reality that exists within our lives. And the truth is our career isn't linear. Our career moves in what I call these little S curves. And let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Your career starts somewhere. For me, it was catching shoplifters. And you start wherever you start. Maybe you're a teacher, whatever. You start and you grow in that thing. And eventually you mature at whatever it is that you were doing, right? I started by catching shoplifters. I grew and I became really confident and I matured at that thing. And it's at that moment of maturity, one of two things happens. Either you choose to stay put, which is what a lot of people do because you feel like, gosh, I can't abandon this. It would almost be sacrilegious to abandon whatever it is that I'm doing. And so you stay put. And what oftentimes happens, you see this all the time. I'm sure you can all think of somebody in your life who's done this. They stay put doing the same thing at the same company, and the same team, whatever the case might be. What ends up happening is they get bored and they atrophy and their passion atrophies and you eventually decline and you have what's, proverbial career death happens as a result of it. And it's at that moment of maturity, when you're not challenged anymore, when you feel like you could do the thing, whatever it is you're doing with your hands tied behind your back or with a blindfold on, right? It's at that moment of maturity where you have to decide, how am I going to evolve and rethink what it is that I'm doing so that I'm presented with new challenges so I can continue growing, right? And being outside my comfort zone. And so you have to evolve. And that starts a whole new S-curve where you continue moving upwards and growing. And then it happens over and over and over again, right? That's how you continue growing your career. It doesn't happen linearly, all right? And I can map my own career. I challenge you to do this on your own if you want to. You draw a bunch of little S-curves and think about all the different stages in your career that led you to where you're at right now. For me, it started, I worked in retail catching shoplifters. And then eventually I did that for so long that I moved into a role where I was teaching others how to catch shoplifters. I thought at the time my perspective was, I'm going to keep catching shoplifters. I thought it was just the evolution of that. But really, I was pivoting into a totally different career path. I just happened to be creating training on catching shoplifters. And then eventually I became an e-learning project manager for the state of Wisconsin. And then eventually the e-learning creative director at Artists in E-Learning. And then that's when I was introduced to speaking at conferences and learning how to write a book. And then I went back into the corporate world as the director of instructional design at a major technology company where I managed a large team of instructional designers and e-learning developers. And then eventually I started freelancing. And if I were to go all the way back to even when I was a training coordinator or catching shoplifters, I could have never imagined the things on the far right end of that diagram. But that's because I wasn't on a linear path. And this is why I hate this question, during an interview when people ask, where do you see yourself in 5 years? It's like, hell if I know. You can't predict the future. I could never predicted I would have ended up here, let alone, I could have never even predicted I would have caught shoplifters for a living, let alone working as an e-learning designer, writing a book, and even recording this video. Like, that's crazy, That's because your career isn't linear. And the important thing to understand of that is that your job and your career aren't the same thing. And I'm going to direct this primarily towards those of you who might be current or former teachers, because there's so many teachers trying to transition out of teaching and into e-learning and instructional design. And one of the struggles that I see with a lot of them is, and if you happen to be one of these people, you might be experiencing in your mind, you're untangling your job from your career. And what I mean by that is, for a lot of people, you associate your career with what you're doing right now. You associate your career with the company you work for, or maybe the school district you work for, or the subject that you teach, or the team that you work on, or the title, or whatever the case might be. And those things get so intertwined. And the truth is, your job and career are two different things. Your job is where you're at right now. Your career is the journey you're on. It's where you were, where you're at, and where you're going, right? And your job is temporary, but the career is the story of, multiple jobs along the way. And they don't have to be intertwined. Your job, where you're at right now, doesn't have to be mutually exclusive with your career and where you're headed. Those are two different things. You should think about them separately. And so with those in mind, getting outside your comfort zone and recognizing that you can't let imposter syndrome hold you back, and that your job and your career is not linear, and your job and your career are two different things. It's okay to ignore the noise out there. It's okay to ignore all of the noise out there that's telling you should be doing this or that. You can choose what noise best fits whatever goals you're trying to achieve and follow that. Because there's no single way into our industry. There's no right way to be in our industry, and I'll talk more about that later. It's okay to be selfish about your career. Not just is it okay to be selfish about your career, I encourage you to be unapologetically selfish about your career. A lot of times people stay in jobs or in industries or positions out of some weird sense of loyalty to that job, that position, that company, that school district, those students, that classroom, whatever the case might be. And I challenge you to ask yourself, well, who's being loyal to you in your career? The truth is, only you get to be loyal to you in your career. And so it's okay to be unapologetically selfish about your career, because you only get one career and you get to do whatever you want with it. And so be unapologetically selfish about it and do what you want to do. And then finally, it's okay to make your own way. Like I said a moment ago, there's no single way into this industry, as much as it sometimes gets positioned that way. And it's okay to make your own way and do it your own way and follow your own path. There's no single front entrance or front door to our industry. It's just full of tons of back doors, because most people fall into it by accident, which is, I think, what makes our industry so interesting and diverse to begin with. So I guess the next question that brings up is, what does any of this have to do with e-learning and instructional design? I know a lot of that's really high level and philosophical in nature, and we'll continue talking about some high level things, but I want to talk about some practical things as well. So how does this relate to growing your e-learning and instructional design career? So, like I said earlier, there's so much noise out there. There's so much noise pointing you and dragging you in so many different directions, and it can be hard trying to sift through what noise is actually trying to help you versus what noise is not based in reality or backed with any actual experience, and what noise is just crap that you should tune out. If I were to give you one simple tip about growing your career, whether it's in e-learning, instructional design, or something else, it's this. You just have to remember that there are two components to being successful in your career, and it's preparation and opportunity. And success happens when those two things meet. Success happens when preparation and opportunity intersect and when they meet one another. And it's your job to work on making these two things intersect. Preparation is you building your skills, right? Building your expertise, building your abilities, building your talent, right? Nurturing your ability to do the things that people might want to hire you for. And opportunity is finding those opportunities, finding the right positions, the jobs, the clients, the hiring managers that are looking for people with your unique skill set. And preparation and opportunity, that's when success happens, when those two things intersect. So what I want to talk about are three things that you can start doing, or three things you can start thinking about that will help give you guidance, the North Star to cut through the noise and start focusing on what are the right steps for you to grow your career. First thing I want to talk about is growing your tangible skills. And, I talk about this all the time about the importance of tangible skills, because with all the other noise out there about portfolios, I'll talk a little bit about that, about what you should and should not do on LinkedIn or keyword stuff in your resume. If there's one thing that's more important than anything else, it's tangible skills. One of my big pet peeves is that oftentimes people position what it means to be in our industry or what it means to be successful as one thing or another. That there's only one way to be an instructional designer, or one way to become an instructional designer, or you should be focusing on these things and not those things. And the truth is being successful in this industry, whether it's e-learning or instructional design or facilitation or whatever it is, LMS administration, being successful in our industry doesn't mean one thing or another. And the reason why that's true is because, like I said earlier, so many people entered our industry with so many different backgrounds that what it means to be an instructional designer depends on who you ask, right? And there's no single right way to be an instructional designer in our industry. And it can be challenging when you're trying to figure out what tangible skills you should be focusing on building, right? You can go start learning about instructional design, and then somebody will come out of the woodwork and be like, you know what? You got to learn how to create an action map. And then you go, oh my gosh, I got to learn how to create an action map. And then you hear about andragogy and pedagogy, and you're, oh my gosh, I didn't know about that. And then you hear XAPI, and you're like, oh my gosh, I think I need to learn XAPI. And then somebody mentions in a job description once, JavaScript and HTML and CSS, and you're like, I got to learn how to code too. And then you're like, oh no, but you got to learn also how to learn Storyline, and then you got to do some video editing, Camtasia. And don't forget about audio narration. You got to learn how to record your own audio and then edit your own audio. And then talk about LMS administration. You got to learn how to manage an LMS, and then project management, and then Addy and Sam. You got to understand that. And then you have visual design. You got to be a good visual designer too, right? My point is, I interact with so many people who have like this frantic energy of like, I got to be learning all these things, and it's not sustainable because it's not possible to learn all those things at once. And the truth is you don't have to learn all those things at once, and you don't have to be passionate about all of those things, and you don't have to be masters of all of those things. I could look at the few things I've listed on this slide. I can tell you half of them I am not passionate about, nor am I an expert on, And so my point is that there's no single way to be in our industry, and our industry is such that you have the luxury to focus on being amazing at the things you want to be amazing at. You don't have to be amazing at it all. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. What oftentimes results from this frantic energy is we oftentimes will spend time on LinkedIn or other social media. And, we hear a lot about this with platforms like Instagram or Facebook. You can go on Instagram and you can find yourself really quickly depressed about how sad and boring your life seems to be according to what others are posting on Instagram or on Facebook. And it's because you're only seeing the curated version of their lives. They're not showing, the crappy versions of their lives. And I sometimes feel like the same can be true on LinkedIn. I found myself over the years going on LinkedIn, finding myself going, gosh, I'm such a loser, because you're seeing all these other people's amazing successes, and you get a sense of FOMO, like a fear of missing out, or that you're not doing enough, or that you're not good enough, or that you didn't get a job in the 2 weeks that they managed to get a job, right? I don't know if that's true, but it can lead you down this path where you feel like, gosh, if they're doing that, maybe I need to be doing that, and then I should be doing this, but because that person's doing that. And then you start comparing yourself. And what ends up happening when you do that is that, if you think of it like running a race, if you spend all of your time running a race, looking back at your perceived competition, because it's really not your competition, but your perceived competition, you're looking back, you're running their race. You're not running your race anymore. And so it sounds cliche, but my advice here is worry about your own backyard. Only worry about you and what you're doing. Don't worry about what other people are doing, because as amazing as some people make themselves out to be on LinkedIn, I promise you that you're only seeing a sliver of what they want to share with you. And so as you think about what you want to focus on, what skills do you focus on, where do you prioritize your efforts, my best advice to you is to focus on the things that you love doing, focus on the things you're good at, and focus on the things you want to be hired for. And as we look at these three things, I know that's not very practical in nature, because you may not know where these three things intersect yet, what you love doing, what you're good at, what you want to be hired for. Your goal isn't to answer that question right away. Your goal is that as you work on developing your skills, whatever those might be, you have to constantly be asking yourself, is this something that I love doing? Is this something that I'm good at? And is this something I'd want to be hired for? And if the answer is no, then it readjusts where you should be focusing. And then you start focusing on something else. And then you start honing in and you figure out where these three things intersect. If you were to go to my portfolio, where I have samples of my own work, they demonstrate exactly these three things: what I love doing, what I'm good at, and what I want to be hired for. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you don't have to be amazing at everything. You just be amazing at a few things, and then start finding jobs for those. We'll talk about that as well. All right, so we talked about focusing on tangible skills. What do hiring managers want? They want your tangible skills. They want to know that you can do the things that they need you to do on the job. This next one, focus on building samples of work. I was originally going to title this Build Your Portfolio, but I want to be really intentional with my wording here, because this is another one of those things that I feel like all the noise in our industry has misconstrued what this means. Hiring managers, the messaging that you hear out there is that you need to build your portfolio. And that's what hiring managers are looking for. They want to see a portfolio. And the truth is, no. They really don't want to see your portfolio in the way that you're thinking of a portfolio. Hiring managers and clients want to see samples of your work. That's really what they want to see. And the reason why I mention this is because the talk of building a portfolio and building a website has misconstrued what that actually means. And people have conflated building a portfolio with having a website. And the truth is having a portfolio does not necessarily mean having a website. Having a portfolio means samples of work. When I was a hiring manager, did I look for people's portfolios? Of course I did. But I wasn't looking for their website. I was looking for evidence of the skills that they claim to have on their resume. And so what you need to focus on is building your portfolio of work, not just building a website, building samples of work to demonstrate those skills that you've been working to build and those skills that you claim to have on your resume. I'll show you my very, very first portfolio. This was probably back in 2011, 2012, maybe. I needed to have a portfolio for a job I was interviewing for. And this was before, it was easy to just build your own website. And so what I did is I opened up PowerPoint. I created this little document called my e-learning project portfolio. And I, included a page about my design process, and I included some mock-ups before mock-ups were a thing of samples of my work. And I took it to a local printer and I had them print it and staple bind it. And what I actually ended up doing was I burnt on CDs samples of my work, and I glued a little CD sleeve on the back of this pamphlet, and I put a CD of my work in there so that, the hiring manager could stick the CD in their computer and see samples of my work. It was archaic times back then. It's like the sticks and stones version of building a portfolio. But my point in showing this to you is that whether you build a website, whether you build a PDF document with links, or whether you just email some links to a hiring manager, it's not about how you deliver your samples of work. It's about the samples of work. And I harp on this so much because I've seen over the last couple of years or so, people spend so much time focused on building a website that they build a website, a beautiful website with their face and their name on it, and there's no samples of work on it. Or the samples of work that are on there are just awful because what they've done is they spent all their time building a portfolio rather than building their skills and then building samples of work. Hiring managers don't care that you've built a website. They care that you have samples of work that demonstrate that you can do the thing that you say you can do. It doesn't have to be a website. It can be. It's great if you do it, but make sure you get your skills up to par and you build samples of work before you go build that website. So what do hiring managers actually want to see? Well, like I said, they want to see samples of your work. I've kind of already hit that one out of the park. They want to see your design process. They want to understand your thinking as an instructional designer. They want to understand how you go about doing the work that you do. And they want to know your personality. They want a portfolio, and they want to see samples of work that represent you. So much of it, so many portfolios you see nowadays or samples of work look identical, and they want to see unique things. They don't want to just see cookie cutter things, right? And you can do that, build something that's unique and show your design process by building samples of work, not just focusing on building a website. All right, so we talked about focusing on tangible skills, talked about building samples of work. The final thing I want to talk about is applying for the right jobs. Not applying for any jobs, but applying for the right jobs. I've talked a little bit about this before when I said, being successful in this industry doesn't mean one thing or another. And it's important to remember that what it means to be an instructional designer depends on who you ask. And different hiring managers and clients are looking for different things in their instructional designers or e-learning designers and developers. And that can cause a little ambiguity, but it can also be a very good thing, depending on how well you focused in on building your tangible skills. Different hiring managers are looking for different things in instructional designers, and you can have two instructional design titles that do very different things. Some instructional designers focus purely on upfront instructional design for things like instructor-led training, and some instructional designers do instructional design that's all focused on e-learning, and some do a little bit of everything. And sometimes you have people who are purely e-learning designers, or people who are pure instructional designers, or a mixture of both. And sometimes they're called training coordinators, or whatever the case might be. Different hiring managers are looking for different things. I'll tell you what they're not looking for, despite what you see in job descriptions, is they're not looking for somebody who's amazing at it all. What they're really looking for is something that's called a T-shaped professional or a T-shaped individual. And what that means is somebody who has broad ability, but knows what their deep expertise is. Let me give you an example of what I mean by this, how I'm a T-shaped professional. I have broad ability in the sense that if you need me to, I can conduct a needs analysis. I can work with stakeholders and subject matter experts to plan a project and scope it. I can do instructional design work for creating an in-person workshop or instructional design work and create a storyboard for an e-learning course, or I can produce video content or create something as simple as a job aid. I can do all that. I can implement my training with my learners. I could even facilitate it if you need me to. And I could also evaluate the effectiveness on the back end. I could do a little bit of all of it if you need me to. I could even manage an LMS, depending on the LMS you give me, right? But does that mean I have a deep expertise in all of those things? No, not at all. I do not care for conducting needs analyses. I don't care for conducting an analysis of the evaluation at the end. It's just not my deep expertise. My deep expertise is, and I'm most successful and I thrive when I'm working in environments or in projects where I am designing highly engaging, interactive, visually, aesthetically pleasing, digital learning experiences in Articulate Storyline, Rise, and Camtasia. That's my deep expertise. And if you were to go to my portfolio, that's exactly what you would see. You would see examples of work that demonstrate my abilities in Articulate Storyline to create highly interactive, visually engaging experiences in Storyline, Rise, and Camtasia. That's my deep expertise. And I focus my work when I work with a client or work on a project, or when I was still working a regular full-time job, I would focus on finding and applying for jobs that aligned with that. And that means that I don't apply for every single job because I'm not going to be the right fit for it. You're looking for an instructional designer who's going to do amazing needs analyses and design for in-person classroom facilitation. I am not your guy for that. There's somebody else that's their deep expertise. My point in saying that is as you work on developing your skills and figuring out what you want to showcase in your portfolio, you want to develop those skills and showcase those examples that go back to those three things I talked about earlier. What do you love doing? What are you good at doing? And what do you want to be hired for? That's your deep expertise. And you should be striving to figure that out so that you can apply for those jobs that align with whatever your deep expertise is. Because nobody wants to hire somebody who's, mediocre at it all. They want to hire somebody who can do it all, but knows what their deep expertise is so that they can lean on you for those things. And along those lines, as you embrace figuring out what your deep expertise is and working towards it, I challenge you to stop editing yourself to fit into someone else's box. We, through, society conditioning us to believe this way, I don't know where this comes from, but when we try to figure out what we focus on for our professional development, or when we go apply for a job, or when we're in an interview, for a lot of people, it's in their nature to try and create this version of themselves to please the other person on the other side of the table. And sometimes we do it to such an extent that we don't even recognize the person that we created. And what bothers me even more is there's advice out there that tells people to do this. There's advice out there that tells people, you know what? Let's say you're a teacher. You shouldn't be too accurate or honest on your resume. Don't say you're a teacher. Well, you're not going to hide the fact that you were a teacher. They're going to know that you were a teacher. They're going to ask you that you were, what did you do? And it's going to come out that you were a teacher. And the risk of over-editing yourself, whether it's on your resume or your LinkedIn profile or your portfolio, or when you're in the middle of an interview and you edit yourself into something you're not, the risk is that you might actually get hired. That person you've created might get hired. And then that hiring manager is going to expect that person you created to show up every day, Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. And that's not going to be sustainable for you. So don't edit yourself to fit into somebody else's box. Embrace who you are. Embrace what your strengths are, what your areas of opportunity are. Nobody's a perfect candidate. And along those lines, you have to remember that it's all temporary. A lot of times I see people constantly striving to find their forever job or their forever boss or the forever company. And, the truth is that, wherever you're at right now, whatever your next job might be, or wherever you'll be after your next job, the likelihood is you're not going to, stay there forever and retire from that job. The chances are there's going to be another job after that. And recognizing and acknowledging that your time at any given position, job, company, boss is temporary gives you the perspective to be really honest with yourself about why you're taking a particular position, or ask yourself, what am I going to gain from this experience, and how's it going to help me get from where I'm at now and where I'm going to be going next, because it's all temporary. So stop trying to fit yourself into somebody else's box, and stop trying to find your forever job or forever position, because that doesn't exist, right? Have perspective that it's temporary. And along those lines, I guess the last thing I'll say about that is it's okay, and you should be excruciatingly transparent about what you want, who you are, what you're good at, and what you're not good at. Because you want to get hired for who you really are and work on a job and a team that embraces who you are rather than that version you created of yourself, right? And so when you're applying for jobs, apply for jobs that support where you're at right now, where your skills are at right now, and jobs where they're looking for somebody like where you're at right now. Apply for jobs that will support you with where you want to go in the future. So because it's all temporary, take that job that's going to be a stepping stone to get you where you want to be. And then, like I said, apply for jobs that support you being you, not some other version that you think you're supposed to be of yourself. All right? All right. So this is my thoughts, tips, inspiration, advice on growing your e-learning and instructional design career. And I know it wasn't horribly practical, right? But my goal was to help provide some levity to all of the craziness that's out there and the noise out there, so that hopefully this can create, a North Star and some reminders to help you keep it real and help you cut out a lot of the noise that's out there, so you can figure out what noise is actually trying to help you versus what noise isn't really helping you. All right. Thank you so much for watching. As I mentioned at the top of today's video, if you happen to be watching this on YouTube, make sure to hit that like, subscribe, and that bell button so that you'll get alerted the next time I publish a video just like this one. And of course, join us inside the e-learning designers community. It is completely free. It's a great place to connect, network, and learn with others who are also looking to grow their e-learning and instructional design careers. All right, my name is Tim Slade, and until next time, I'll see you around. Bye.